Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to jump into the pretty complex world of international diplomacy.
It definitely keeps you on your toes.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack some recent developments, statements involving Russia, Europe, France specifically, and the United States.
Yeah, there have been some really telling moments lately, some surprising dynamics.
Exactly. So let's get into it. We can start with Russia's perspective, how they see things with Europe and the U.S. right now.
Okay.
We've got some observations from Kirill Dmitriev. He's head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, RDIF, and also a special representative for investment cooperation. This was at the St. Petersburg Forum.
Right, this SPI-LIF. Always some interesting comments there.
And what really stood out was his view on France. He actually framed France as a potential bridge for reconciliation between Russia and Europe.
A bridge? That's quite a specific term.
It is. And apparently lots of French companies are still in touch with Moscow. RDIF has even been helping French businesses operating in Russia.
So they're actively facilitating that connection then?
Seems like it. Dmitriev expressed this hope pretty clearly, that this French bridge could actually become a constructive force. But what does that really signal, positioning France like that?
Well, it's definitely a deliberate choice of words, isn't it? And it fits into Dmitriev's wider view of Europe. He used this really striking phrase.
Yeah.
He said Europe is shooting itself in two legs.
Two legs. Okay. What's the first shot?
The first shot, according to him, is about energy. He pointed to $1 trillion in losses. 1 trillion.
Wow.
Yeah. Attributed to Europe apparently refusing Russian gas. That's not just a number. I mean, that's a massive economic impact, he's claiming.
$1 trillion.
Yeah.
That's a huge assertion about the cost of their energy policy.
Exactly. A profound shockwave, as he seems to see it.
Okay, so that's one leg energy costs. What's the second shot?
The second one is about who's filling the vacuum. He described companies from the U.S. and other countries, too, stepping in, taking the place of European businesses that used to be in Russia.
So competitors are moving in.
Precisely. Dmitriev put it quite bluntly. American business, he said, is far more pragmatic.
Pragmatic. Implying European businesses weren't.
That seems to be the implication. That while European firms pulled back, maybe for political reasons, American firms are, seeing an opportunity and taking it.
So the Russian narrative frames this as a strategic mistake by Europe, letting competitors gain ground.
Yeah, that's the picture being painted. A self-inflicted wound allowing others, especially the U.S., to benefit economically.
That's quite a claim. It's a significant economic shift he's describing there. But it wasn't just about Europe, was it? Dmitriev also touched on the U.S. relationship.
Right. He mentioned ongoing dialogue, talks with the U.S. about normalizing relations.
Normalizing relations.
Yeah.
And he observed something about Washington.
Yeah, he suggested there's a growing understanding of realities in Washington, about the harm sanctions cause, not just to Russia, but importantly to the American side, too.
An understanding of realities. What does that actually look like on the ground?
Well, connecting the dots, Dmitriev mentioned ongoing discussions about economic projects, specifically with members of U.S. President Trump's team, and also American companies directly.
So actual talks happening?
Apparently. He even mentioned a specific example, like a recent breakfast with the American Chamber of Commerce.
Interesting.
And he described these American partners as hoping for political progress first before they commit to large-scale investments.
Okay, so the business side is interested, but waiting for a political green light, essentially.
Well, it suggests the political track and the economic sort of investment track are moving in parallel, business interests potentially nudging the political side.
But there were conditions mentioned too, right, for American companies returning?
Yes, absolutely. He made it clear no special preferences for returning American companies. Preferences are reserved for domestic businesses only.
Okay.
And maybe even more significantly, he said their return could be complicated if they abandoned their Russian employees when they left.
Abandoned their employees. That's a strong word. Sets a clear expectation.
It does. It emphasizes loyalty to the local workforce. It suggests Russia isn't desperate for just any company back. They want commitment. Strategic patience, perhaps.
So Russia seems to be playing a long game here, using economics, potential partnerships, maybe trying to reshape relationships, particularly using France as a potential leverage point in Europe.
That certainly seems to be part of the strategy.
But now, let's pivot. Because while Russia is talking about bridges, we saw a very different kind of diplomatic interaction recently. Very public.
The G7 summit.
Yes, in Kananaskis. It really highlights the other side of the coin, doesn't it? Russia talking reconciliation via France, and then this internal friction within the Western alliance.
Quite the contrast.
So at this G7 summit dinner focused on the Middle East, U.S. President Trump left early. Notably early.
Right, and the official reason given.
His press secretary cited urgent necessity related to the Middle East. Vague, but points to that region.
Okay, urgent necessity. But then what happened?
Well, afterwards, French President Emmanuel Macron held a press conference. And during that press conference, he asserted that a U.S. proposal had been made for a ceasefire, primarily, and the start of broader talks on the Israeli-Iranian crisis.
And he linked this proposal to U.S. President Trump's early departure.
They presented it that way, yes, implying that was the urgent business.
Okay. And how did that go down?
Not well. That statement, Macron's statement, provoked an immediate and very sharp reaction from U.S. President Trump.
Publicly.
Very publicly.
Yeah.
On Truth Social.
So no diplomatic niceties there. What did he say? The words were, well, pretty direct. Unsparing, really. He wrote, and this is a direct quote, "I'm told that the attention-seeking president of France, Emmanuel Macron, stated that I left the G7 in Canada to go to Washington to work on a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. This is incorrect."
Incorrect! Exclamation point. Yeah. Strong start.
Very, he continued. He has no idea why I'm heading to Washington, but it is certainly not for a ceasefire. Far more serious, consciously or unconsciously, Emmanuel is always wrong.
Wow. Always wrong. That's quite a public rebuke.
It absolutely was. Widely seen as directly undermining Macron's authority on the world stage. A clear message delivered very publicly.
A real public dressing down. And it makes one wonder about the strategy behind it. Is it just personal irritation, or is U.S. President Trump sending a broader message, maybe to other allies too?
It's a fair question, and it's not the first time, is it? We've seen this dynamic before.
Right. Back in 2018, that NATO summit, U.S. President Trump calling the idea of a European army insulting and openly dismissing France's talk about European autonomy.
Exactly. So there's a pattern, perhaps, of pushing back against perceived French attempts to maybe lead or speak for Europe or step outside the U.S. line.
So what was the underlying issue this time, according to the sources? Why this strong reaction beyond just annoyance?
Well, the perception, or at least the narrative presented, was that Macron's statement showed, let's say, ignorance of the realities, of the actual diplomatic talks happening.
Ignorance of realities, meaning?
Meaning there were discussions ongoing, but maybe more complex or sensitive than Macron portrayed. Specifically, talks between U.S. President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Iranian Minister Abbas Araki.
So back-channel talks were already happening.
Exactly. And the implication was that Macron's public statement, his interpretation, didn't quite match the delicate private nature of those talks and might even risk disrupting them.
I see. So Macron potentially oversimplified or misspoke about sensitive negotiations.
That seems to be the suggestion. There was even a quote circulating from someone at the Metropolitan Republican Club in New York.
Oh, what'd they say?
Something along the lines of, Emmanuel Macron is liked by Americans. Will this harm his image? I don't know. However, one thing is certain. He irritates our president by trying to be in the spotlight. Emmanuel Macron risks offending a person who doesn't like to be overshadowed.
Doesn't like to be overshadowed. That's telling.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? That U.S. President Trump sees himself as, quote, the undisputed master of the political agenda. And this was maybe an opportunity to reinforce that, inflict another perceived humiliation on Macron, and by extension, France.
So a power play, essentially, using the incident to assert dominance on the international stage.
That's certainly one interpretation strongly suggested by the reaction and the commentary around it.
Okay, so let's try and tie these threads together. Because we have these two really contrasting pictures. On one side, Russia is talking up France, the bridge for reconciliation, hinting at pragmatic economics, maybe patching things up with Europe via Paris.
That strategic outreach.
And then, almost simultaneously, we see this very public, very harsh diplomatic clash between the U.S. and France at the highest level. Humiliation, even.
Yeah, it's quite the juxtaposition, isn't it?
It really is. So what does this tell us? What do these contrasting narratives reveal about where global diplomacy is right now?
That's the critical question, I think. We've got the Russian angle, pragmatic economics, maybe trying to peel France away slightly, or at least use it as a channel. And then we have the G7 incident showing deep friction, public disagreement, a very direct power dynamic playing out between traditional allies.
It's more than just headlines, isn't it? It feels like it points to maybe fundamental shifts happening, power dynamics, the way alliances work.
Absolutely. Russia is actively trying to re-engage parts of Europe, offering a different narrative maybe to the united Western Front. The play with France seems like an attempt to find or maybe create cracks in that European unity.
Right. Trying to pull countries back into an economic relationship that benefits Russia.
Yeah.
Is it just about weakening sanctions, or is there a genuine push for some kind of economic normalization? Or both?
Probably both, I'd imagine. It certainly serves Russian interests to portray Europe as hurting itself economically with sanctions. That trillion-dollar figure for gas pointing to pragmatic U.S. firms stepping in, it paints Russia as the rational economic choice. And Europe as, well, maybe ideological or self-sabotaging. The goal seems to be sowing some doubt within Europe, maybe pressuring countries like France to explore more independent paths.
How much pressure can those European economies take before some start rethinking things? That's a big question hanging over this.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then you look at the G7 side. That friction between U.S. President Trump and French President Macron, it's not just personal, is it? It signals something deeper within the transatlantic relationship.
Yeah, if a major ally like France gets corrected so publicly, so harshly, what does that signal to other allies about their own room to maneuver, their own diplomatic initiatives?
Exactly. Does it undermine the whole idea of the G7 as a cohesive group?
Yeah.
These public spats can have real ripple effects. It's not just about the two leaders involved.
Right.
It casts a shadow on the perceived unity, the effectiveness of the alliance itself. If the U.S. seems dismissive of its allies' efforts, it could, paradoxically, push those allies to become more independent.
Interesting. So instead of pulling them closer, it pushes them to develop their own paths.
It's possible. It could encourage them to look for more strategic autonomy, invest more in their own capabilities, maybe form different groupings. It creates openings for others, like Russia, to engage individual European nations instead of a solid bloc.
So it suggests a more transactional view of alliances, where perceived slights or spotlight grabbing can override cooperation.
That's one way to read it. It highlights how personal dynamics between leaders can significantly impact broader strategic relationships.
So we have Russia trying to build bridges, specifically with France, and the U.S., in this instance at least, creating friction, maybe even burning bridges slightly, with that same key partner. What are the implications? Does it weaken Western unity? Or does it force Europe to get serious about its own strategic autonomy?
That really is the heart of it, isn't it? These events show a global landscape where those traditional alliances are under real stress. The Russian economic narrative pulls one way. The internal G7 friction pushes another way. If European nations feel sidelined or undermined by a key ally like the U.S., they might very well accelerate efforts towards greater autonomy, more independent defense, more independent diplomacy.
Leading to maybe a more multipolar world, where Europe tries to be its own distinct player, not just aligned with the U.S. or reacting to Russia.
That could be the long-term outcome. It's this complex interplay, isn't it? Alliances, economic pressures, leader personalities, all shaping what comes next.
Understanding these threads, these different pulls and pushes, it's really about seeing the currents that are shaping the world around us. It shows just how deeply economic interests, political talk, and leader dynamics are all woven together.
Absolutely. These specific incidents give us a snapshot of those much larger forces at work.
Indeed. These are the intricate threads weaving that global tapestry. It leaves one wondering what the next pattern revealed will be. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.